Unit 4, Formulation of Research Problems. 4.1, Introduction. Research is an effort to seek answers to questions confronting the researcher. It seeks answers to questions which have not yet been answered. Research helps in the development of generalizations, principles, or theories, which open either new vistas of understanding in the relevant field of knowledge, or help in verifying the existing knowledge. The research questions can be of quantitative or qualitative nature, and both require collecting the relevant data, their analysis, and interpretation, so as to arrive at some conclusion which provides the solution to a problem. Research is a gateway to new knowledge that obviously depends on how meaningfully the problem has been identified and research questions have been answered. In the beginning, a researcher has problem blindness and perceives a very diffused, vague, and general view of a problem. Hence, the identification of a problem is the most important and difficult step in the research process. It is a most thoughtful effort. Even a little carelessness on the part of the researcher spoils the spirit of research. It is a systematic attempt to obtain answers to meaningful questions about a phenomenon through the application of scientific procedures. Problem identification and its formulation is inventive and individualistic rather than routine and mechanical. The identification of a research problem requires a great deal of patience and logical thinking on the part of the researcher. A beginning researcher finds the task of identifying a research problem a difficult one. This may be due to his limited knowledge of the research process and his unpreparedness for identifying the problem. He may also be unfamiliar with the areas in which research is needed and the procedure he is to follow for selecting a suitable field for research. In this unit, you will study the nature of the research problem and its identification by using various sources. You will also understand the criteria for selecting a suitable problem for research. The suggestions for formulating research questions will also be explained to you. Objectives. After studying this unit, you will be able to discuss the nature of the research problem, identify and select the problem of research, list the criteria of selecting a suitable problem of research, discuss the nature of research questions, and explain the meaning of hypothesis, what its importance is, and types of hypotheses. 4.2, Nature of a problem. There are two types of research problems, viz., those which relate to the state of nature and those which relate to the relationship between variables. For example, a problem stated as epistemological realities in the Panchatantra is a problem which discovers the sources of knowledge in Panchatantra. Hence, it is classified in the first category of research. If the problem is stated as the effect of television viewing on the values of children, the study explains the relationship between variables, i.e., television viewing and values of children. Hence, it is classified in the second category of research. Thus, the problem of research should be such that it will help in theory building, making generalizations, and formulating principles that will form the basis for the future generation of knowledge, besides making an original contribution to the respective field of knowledge. It has to be further seen whether the nature of research is quantitative or qualitative, since the problem formulation varies as the nature of research varies. Under this classification, various other types of research fall. For example, experimental and survey types of research fall under quantitative research, whereas historical, ethnographic, and philosophical research fall under qualitative research. The following examples will make the distinction between qualitative and quantitative research clearer. Quantitative research, a comparative effect of inductive and deductive methods of teaching on the development of problem-solving skills among 8th grade students. Experimental research, a study of values of secondary school teachers in relation to their socioeconomic status, survey-type research. Qualitative research, development of higher education in post-independent India, historical research, multicultural analysis of attitudes towards education, ethnographic research, metaphysical study of the literature of Swami Vivekananda, philosophical research. The essence of research, moreover, is to arrive at dependable solutions to the problem through a well-thought-out scientific procedure. This purpose is only served when the problem aims at arriving at dependable solutions to the problem, makes useful generalizations and theory development, provides insight into hypothesis formulation, provides direction for the choice of research design, helps in wise choice of statistical or other relevant methods of interpretations. Kurlinger, 1993, states the following three criteria of a good problem. It should express a relationship between two or more variables. The problem should be stated clearly and unambiguously in question form. The statement of a problem must imply possibilities of empirical testing. Hence, a research problem that does not survive the above salient features cannot be considered useful and worthwhile. A large part of the solution lies in knowing what one is trying to do. Another part lies in knowing what a problem is, and especially what a scientific problem is. SOAR 4.3, Identification of a Research Problem. Clear and concise identification of the problem is not an easy matter. Some research studies are pursued in such a way that it is difficult to determine what the researcher is trying to investigate. A most challenging situation for a researcher occurs when he feels bewildered and suffers from diffused perceptions of the situations amenable to research. Identification of a research situation is an important phase of the entire research process. It demands a great deal of thinking, searching, and speculating on the part of a researcher. It consumes a lot of energy, time, and effort. A beginning researcher finds it very difficult to locate the problem situation. This may happen because he has limited knowledge of the research process. He may be unfamiliar with the areas in which research is needed and the procedures that he has to follow to identify a suitable area of research. Novice investigators have an unrealistic, glamorized conception of a research problem. An investigator should follow the formulation of research problems through the following major tasks in analyzing a problematic situation. Van Dalen, 1973. I. Accumulating the facts that might be related to the problem. I. Settling by observation whether the facts are relevant. I. Tracing any relationship between facts that might reveal the key difficulty. I. Proposing various explanations for the cause of the difficulty. V. Ascertaining through observation and analysis whether these explanations are relevant to the problem. Vi. Tracing the relationship between explanations that may give an insight into the problem solution. Vi. Tracing the relationship between facts and explanations. And V. Questioning assumptions underlying the analysis of the problem. The researcher, for instance, may face problems in classrooms, in the administration of a college, and in all other areas of education, such as the teaching-learning process, guidance and counseling, curriculum, textbooks, physically and mentally challenged children, etc. A research problem must be firmly rooted in knowledge. The researcher should first identify a general area in which he wishes to do research, and then immediately set about reviewing the knowledge available in that area. The researcher must first decide the area of his/her interest and the purpose of his/her research endeavors. It must be the area of research where the researcher is capable of demonstrating necessary initiative, insight, critical analysis, and judgmental capacities. The identification of a problem situation follows the following procedural efforts on the part of a researcher. The understanding of the known theories, facts, and ideas in the field of the researcher's interest. Structures, his/her problem-searching domain. The research focus is sharpened by what he already knows, what research in his/her field has been conducted, and what needs to be discovered. A problem situation of research may emerge from the researcher's curiosity about something shared, seen, felt, or wondered about, or through the natural interest of a researcher. Life situations, relationships established by related researchers, and implications advanced by technological advancements constitute the problem situation. New knowledge in the field of the researcher's interest. Coming through the new arrivals of books, journals, and research extends a situation for research. A survey of suggestions for further research, given at the end of research reports and reviews of research projects, as well as the gaps in a particular field of educational research, is helpful in keeping the researcher informed about what research is going on in the field in which he has competence and deeper understanding. 4.4 Sources for selecting a research problem. After the broad area of research interest has been identified, the researcher will proceed towards narrowing it down to a highly specific and focused research problem. The problems do not germinate in barren brains, but rather in minds enriched by varied experiences and fertile layers of knowledge. Reading educational publications extensively will help to prepare an intellectual soil in which problem ideas are likely to sprout. There are various sources available to researchers that help them identify and specify meaningful research problems. These are mainly theory, experience, discussion, dissatisfaction, literature. Task 4.4.1 Theory. Scientific conceptions of the nature of things involve theories. The researcher should have some understanding of the nature of theory and should avoid trying to build theories that are too sophisticated. Theory is a set of generalizations arrived at by carefully analyzed and studied phenomena. The inferences drawn from psychological and educational theories, when known to a researcher, help in identifying the research area. The application of principles derived from theories provides an authentic ground to locate the problem. For example, theories of learning, personality, and motivation have provided research initiatives that were used to improve classroom teaching learning situations, curriculum design, and evaluation in the field of education. Therefore, an important source of research problems lies in the inferences that can be drawn from various educational and psychological theories. The application of general principles involved in various theories to a specific classroom situation makes an excellent starting point for research. It helps to determine whether a particular theory can be translated into actual practice, and also the validity, scope, and practicability of various theories in educational situations. For instance, if the effect of basic teaching model on a teacher's performance in class is to be studied, the theory on which this model is developed becomes an important reference. Moreover, the theory explains the phenomena under research proposed, permits the prediction of the occurrence, non-occurrence of the phenomena, enables the investigator to postulate and eventually discover unknown and unobserved phenomena, explains the relationship among various components, facts, and principles, pinpoints the crucial aspects to be investigated and crucial questions to be answered, and helps the researcher to structure and restructure the domain of understanding. Research and theory go together. If research is conducted without consulting a theory, it means that many essential aspects of theory that could guide and control the researcher's efforts are ignored. If the researcher intends to work in the domain of teaching and learning, then learning theories by Pavlov and Skinner provide a framework for designing research in that area. Theory, of course, does not provide answers, but stimulates and controls research. STOT 4.4.2 Experience. The best single way for a researcher to find a good research problem is to attach himself/herself to a dynamic research environment, which increases opportunities for finding and solving problems. Spirited intellectual discourses, in which ideas are presented, explained, analyzed, and challenged, are a rich source of inspiration. Attending professional meetings, particularly those in which papers are read and discussed, conferences with stimulating professors, lectures by eminent educationists, discussions with fellow research workers, and part-time jobs in research-worthy investigations provide clues needed for the solution of problems. Professors and research experts who have had experience in tackling a particular type of problem can help guide the novice on what can and cannot be successfully accomplished. Examining everyday experiences gives and inspires ideas about a problem. Thus, by participating in various academic activities and interacting with researchers and fellow teachers, a researcher may confront problems of various natures, including psychological, sociological, behavioral, and administrative issues. The personal experience that the researcher gains helps him/her in the following ways: develops insight into sharpening the focus of research, experiences the relative usefulness of various issues that emerge in his/her mind for research, explores the context for innovative research, formulates the research problem more meaningfully and practically, equips the researcher with such understanding that he or she can identify problematic situations, behaviors, and issues for which solutions are not available and need to be researched, and becomes a wiser researcher. Thus, the personal experience that the researcher gains is a potential source of research problems to be identified and formulated. Experience is a great teacher. You can formulate a research problem based on your own experience or the experiences of persons associated with you. For example, you may decide to focus on aspects such as the significance of the presence of the whole family in psychoeducation pertaining to a family member's physical illness, the role of the father in counseling, the impact of a couple's interpersonal relationship on their child, or the influence of mass media on adolescents. Let me know this 4.4.3 discussion. Discussion works as a brainstorming exercise. It helps in settling a problem. While discussing with researchers, professors, and other intellectual persons, the shrinkages of mind are opened, and then there is a germination of a seed of a new problem. These discussions give chances to the researcher to get into close contact with crucial problems and issues. The researcher finds a group of individuals working enthusiastically on some enterprise, and some of their enthusiasm will rub off on him/her. Sometimes researchers have problems in their minds, but are not able to verbalize and give proper shape to the problem. It is discussions with their fellows and other senior professors that help them to evolve a manageable research problem from one that was very vague and complex. Discussion is a very useful resource for research problem identification. The following are some of the advantages the researcher gets out of discussion. Contemporary research areas capture the mind of a researcher. Certain ambiguities that the researcher initially has get clarified. The researcher is helped with new academic inputs to reflect upon problem situations and to come out with suitable research problem identification. Many unknown hazards that the researcher may experience while identifying a problem situation become known to him/her. The meaningfulness of the research problem in the mind is further judged, e.g., whether this research problem will make a significant contribution to the existing knowledge or not. The researcher may be able to make a clear classification as to how to classify her or his problem, whether it will be fundamental, applied, or action research. No 4.4 dissatisfaction. When a researcher attempts the identification of a problem, she or he has to go through various situations, some satisfying and some dissatisfying. Research is a felt need of a researcher. Need itself leads to inadequacy, and this inadequacy activates the researcher to design a course of action through which that need is fulfilled. The inadequacies and incompatibilities create dissatisfaction within the researcher, prompting her or him to identify the problem, which clearly shows the direction to the solution of a problem. After the researcher perceives the problem for its proper identification and formulation, she or he reviews the literature, discusses with people, consults recent books and journals, and traces some flaws, gaps, and inadequacies in their thinking. She or he may find it difficult to give a proper shape to her or his thinking, and it becomes a gigantic task to formulate research questions. The dissatisfaction thus created becomes a rich source of inspiration. While working in institutions or reading good books related to the problem area, the researcher is confronted with many dissatisfying situations that make her or him problem sensitive. She or he then thinks about a problem and comes out with a proper identification and formulation of the research problem. These days, information and communication technology has revolutionized almost every aspect of human life, consequently posing new challenges and input for thinking. The researcher experiences dissatisfaction in herself or himself when she or he comes out with such problem situations as the impact of these technologies on human life. 4.45 The literature. The review and survey of literature may help the researcher expand her or his knowledge background, examine new findings in her or his field, identify gaps in knowledge, and discover contradictions in findings and the need for fresh studies and their direction. Through her or his various readings, she or he comes to know about various methods and techniques of research used by other researchers, learns about facts, phenomena, concepts, and theories related to her or his field of research, which may be useful to her or him in the formulation, description, and conduct of her or his study. The source literature consists of surveys, periodicals, and journals, foreign and Indian books, encyclopedias, dictionaries, handbooks, and yearbooks, bibliographical literature, and other references. 4.4 Definition and statement of the problem. After the problem has been identified, the next step is to state or define it in a form amenable to research. To define a problem means to put a fence around it, to separate it by careful distinctions from like questions found in related literature and situations. The researcher must be certain that he knows exactly what his problem is before he begins work on it. Specifying a problem explicitly and narrowing it down to a workable size are extremely important at the very start. In the formal definition of the problem, the researcher is required to describe the background of the study, its theoretical basis and underlying assumptions, and state the problem in concrete, specific, and workable questions. A good statement of a problem must clarify exactly what is to be determined or solved. In stating a problem, the researcher should see that it is neither stated in such general terms as to become vague, with no clear indications of the direction the study is to take, nor specified so narrowly as to become insignificant and trivial. The problem should be stated in such a way that it indicates a relationship between two or more variables. It should neither involve philosophical issues, nor values or judgmental questions that cannot be answered by scientific investigation. 4.6 Research Questions. 4.6.1 Formulation of research questions. A good statement of a problem must restrict the scope of the study to specific and workable research questions. These questions are the questions that the researcher would like to be answered or addressed. Research questions are the more specific situations from a general presentation of ideas. A researcher begins with a broad formulation of a problem, for example, information technology. From this, he/she moves to a specific situation like role of information technology in developing teaching models. To study this problem, the researcher then reformulates the problem into a statement of intent or purpose. How does information technology contribute to developing teaching models? After this, the investigator still requires narrowing the intent to a specific question. Can information technology help in the development of teaching models? Thus, after having studied a lot in the area of her or his interest, the researcher tries to ultimately decide what exactly should be her or his problem of research. It is not always possible for the researcher to formulate her or his problem simply, clearly, and completely. She or he may often have only a rather general, diffused, and even vague notion of the problem. This is in the nature of the complexity of scientific research. If the problem has been formulated in either a broad manner or a narrow way, it gives results that are either very vague or very trivial. This is the stage when she or he finally chooses or states the problem. The formulation of a problem needs the choice of a format of the problem, whether the researcher will state the problem in question form or in a simple statement. For example, what is the effect of innovative methods of teaching on the academic achievement of children? This problem is in question form. The other format may be a study of psychosocial factors leading to the deterioration of values among adolescents in a statement form. An important consideration underlying the final statement of the research problem is that it must be feasible and tenable. For example, the role of a teacher in the cognitive development of children is a problem that cannot be studied. In fact, it is not an answerable problem. It can, however, be made researchable by restating it as a study of the relationship of teaching style and problem-solving behavior of children. It is specific, precise, and trimmed to a manageable size. 4.6.2 How to specify the delimitation. Before the research problem is carried out, it should have boundaries, which give ample opportunity to view it from varied vistas and also suggest the most promising approach to it. The researcher must eventually formulate one or more precisely stated research questions about a particular problem, not in a fuzzy state of understanding. However, the following procedure may be followed to delimit the research question from a broad area of research. A preliminary explanation of the facts and theories relating to the problem area should be conducted. Specification of the variables that have to be exactly studied and delimited, e.g., intelligence and creativity. At the time of defining them, many problems come up, such as, are all the indicators of intelligence related to creativity? What indicators of creativity should be taken in this investigation? Which indicators of intelligence are related to creativity? What precisely are the factors related to the investigation? Indication of the relationship between one or two variables. The selected problem should not be too broad or too narrow. trimming of an investigation to a manageable size, to fewer variables, to a smaller geographical area, sample, and segment of time. The researcher may break down the original problem into several subproblems or subquestions. Sometimes two or more subquestions are incorporated in one study. Because of time, cost, and other considerations, the researcher may have to reduce the scope of his investigation. Therefore, the problem should be specified in the following aspects: certain variables, size of sample, nature of sample, method and design indicated, tools and techniques, geographical area. The following example will illustrate how delimitations are specified. What is the effect of levels of socioeconomic status on the academic achievement of 8th grade researchers? In this research question, variables have been specified. That is, socioeconomic status and academic achievement are the variables. The sample, that is, 8th grade students, has been delimited, and then what is to be done is also specified. Thus, the delimitations are observed in terms of variables, sample, tool, statistical techniques, etc. Top 4.63. How to frame a question statement. The purpose of the statement of research is narrowed in the form of a research question statement. Question statements are interrogative statements that narrow the purpose statement to specific questions that the researcher seeks to answer in her or his study. In both types of research, quantitative and qualitative, question statements are framed. In quantitative research, the question statement explains the relationship among variables, while in qualitative research, the question statement includes a central phenomenon to be explored. Research questions are typically framed at the end of the introduction of the statement of the problem section or immediately following the review of the literature. While formulating a research question, the following process is tenable. Pose a question. Begin with how, what, or why. Specify the independent, dependent, and control variables, or specify a phenomenon. Use such words as describe, compare, relate, or indicate the action or connection among the variables. Indicate the sample population. 3 popular forms are available to frame the question statement: question, relationship, and comparison. The following examples appropriately explain the 3 forms of question statements. Question form. How can computer-assisted learning foster better student learning? Relationship form. What psychosocial factors relate to the cognitive development of children? Comparison form. What is the comparative effect of inductive and deductive methods on the achievement of 8th grade students in mathematics? 4.6.4 Suggestions for formulating research questions. Adequate formulation of a research question statement is one of the most important parts of research. At the point when the question statement is framed, the researcher must not lose sight of the ultimate desirability and necessity of doing so, nor should any difficulty be used as a rationalization to avoid stating the problem. Research questions differ greatly, and there is no one right way to state them. Certain characteristics of problems and problem statements can be learned and used to good advantage. However, there are some suggestions which, if followed, result in good research question statements being framed. Research questions must explain the relationship among variables. Research questions should not be vague. For example, what is the issue of illiteracy? A specific problem to be solved must be indicated. For example, what is the effect of intelligence on achievement? Research questions should be researchable and feasible. These must be within the reach of a researcher and must contribute to the quantum of knowledge. It must specify the activities of the researcher. A good research question monitors the researcher's efforts. It must not involve any philosophical issue or value judgment. It should be observed that the problem solution fills the gap in the existing knowledge or helps to fill the gap in the existing known facts or resolve some of the inconsistencies or interpretations. The scope of the investigation, or the limits within which the problem is to be studied, must be mentioned explicitly in stating a research problem. 4.6.5 Characteristics of research questions. The problem that is eventually isolated for a research purpose is stated preferably in terms of a question or statement form for which the proposed research is designed to obtain an answer. Good research questions must have the following characteristics. Research questions must be amenable to research. Research questions must be based on a solid theoretical basis. A good research question must explain the relationship among variables. The research question should not be vaguely formulated. It should equip the researcher with insight into what can be done, what relevant data can be gathered to find the answer. It must serve as a guide for planning the study and choice of statistics for interpreting the results. The solution of the research question should be of practical or theoretical value. The breadth of the application of the findings should be in terms of the range of individuals, and years of applicability should be wide. It must lead the development of other investigations. The solution of research questions should be well within the reach of a researcher in terms of his/her competency, accessibility to data, financial resources, time at her or his disposal, her/his determination, and other related considerations. The following few examples will illustrate all the above characteristics of research questions. How does homework influence the problem-solving behavior of children? What is the effect of cooperative and competitive learning on the cognitive development of children? What is the relationship between the learning styles and learning types of gifted and creative children studying at the secondary level? Is there any relationship between child-rearing practices and cognitive development of children? How does the communication network influence the academic achievement of primary school children with regard to their intelligence and personality type? What classroom factors lead to the development of self-regulated learning? TOS 4.6.6 Objectives of Research Questions. The main function of research is the creation of new knowledge and the verification of existing knowledge consistent with scientific research today. It is viewed as a process. The process is cyclical. It typically begins with a problem or issue that needs to be studied and ends with a written report. Thus, the whole process has to emanate from the objectives of research questions, which are directed to make the research questions amenable to study and find the solution for, to result in the development of new theories, principles, or laws by determining the relation between two or more variables. The research having this type of objective contributes basic knowledge to human knowledge, to explore new facts and relationships, to eliminate personal bias, to facilitate the scientific process of conducting the research, to help specify the design of the study, the method of analysis of data, and interpretations. Considering a problem which the researcher may undertake for investigation, she or he is required to ask herself/himself a series of questions about it. The questions are: is the problem researchable? Is the problem new? Is the problem significant? These questions are helpful in evaluating the feasibility of the problem on the basis of the personal suitability of the researcher and the social value of the problem. All these questions must be answered affirmatively before the study is undertaken. 4.7 Meaning of the hypothesis. As soon as a research question is formulated, it makes the hypothesis formulation imperative, since it is a tentative solution or an intelligent guess about a research question under study. It is an assumption or proposition whose tenability is to be tested on the basis of its implications with empirical evidence and with previous knowledge. Modern investigators agree that, whenever possible, the research should proceed from a hypothesis. In the words of Van Dalen, 1973, a hypothesis serves as a powerful beacon that lights the way for the research worker. Etymologically, hypothesis is made up of two words: hypo, less than, and thesis, which means less than a thesis. It is the presumptive statement of a proposition or a reasonable guess based upon the available evidence, which the researcher seeks to prove through his/her study. Hypothesis is an assumption or proposition whose testability is to be tested on the basis of the compatibility of its implications with empirical evidence and previous knowledge. Mooley, 1963. It is also a declarative statement in which the investigator makes a prediction or a conjecture about the outcome of the relationship. The conjecture or the prediction is not simply an educated guess. Rather, it is typically based on past research, which investigators gathered as evidence to advance the hypothesized relationship between variables. In the formulation of a hypothesis, the investigator looks for statements where she/he relates one or more variables to make predictions about the relationships. The hypothesis tells the researcher what to do and why to do it in the context of the problem. For example, The researcher is interested in studying a problem. Why does a gifted child become a poor achiever in his class? The researcher then moves towards finding out the causes and factors that have been responsible for his poor achievement. He makes a conjecture that he might be suffering from some disease at the time of the examination. This conjecture is in the form of a hypothesis and determines what the researcher should do to verify whether it is a fact or not. He shall go to the house of the student, meet his parents, and inquire about the student's health. All that the investigator is doing is guided by the hypothesis he had developed. Hypothesis thus refers to a conjecture statement about the solution of a problem, which the researcher goes on to verify on the basis of the relevant information collected by him. It is said to be a hunch, shrewd guess, or supposition about what may be the answer to a problem. It is a statement that is tested in terms of the relationship or prediction, which after testing is either accepted or rejected. The terms hypothesis, theory, or conclusion occur frequently in research literature, but differ slightly from each other. Hypothesis is defined as a tentative solution or working proposition suggested as a solution to a problem, and theory as the final hypothesis, which is defensively supported by all evidence. The final hypothesis, which fits all the evidence, becomes the chief conclusion inferred from the study, Hilly, 1964. The hypothesis relates theory to observation and vice versa. Hypotheses, when tested, are either rejected or accepted and help to infer the conclusion, which helps in theory building. 4.8 Sources of Hypothesis. The formulation of a good hypothesis is a difficult task. The value of research is determined by the results conclusions arrived at after testing the hypothesis. It requires a researcher to be speculative, imaginative, having good knowledge, deep insight, and an analytical mind. The sources that are available with a researcher for deriving a tenable hypothesis are as follows. 4.8.1 Experience and creativity of the researcher. Both creativity and experience are capable of deriving adequate hypotheses. While working in an environment, a researcher comes across many problems, some of which are serious enough and require hard work to solve them. For example, a researcher who is working on the classroom correlates of effective teaching can think of a host of factors, such as the teacher's mastery over the subject, effective use of teaching skills, decision-making capability, perception of his competence, perception of students' capacity for better interaction, use of communication skills, etc. Top 4.8.2 Background knowledge. A critical analysis of the background factors may facilitate the task of studying the relationship among the variables. Personal experiences of the researcher as a result of his personal readings of biographies, autobiographies, newspapers, research activities, relevant literature, informal talks with friends, socio-political speeches, etc., can be potential sources in the generation of a hypothesis. It is necessary for a researcher to be thoroughly familiar with established facts, existing theories, and previous research relating to the problem. The related literature is an important source of hypothesis formulation. It sharpens the perspective of a researcher as to how to hypothesize the relationship among the variables, which aspects of the relationship have been already studied, and which still remain to be tested. A rich background of knowledge enables the researcher to locate the key associations among the variables and to find the missing data needed to explain a phenomenon. The researcher should have intensive knowledge in the area in which he is carrying out an investigation and should be insightful so that he may deduce a hypothesis inductively after making observations of behavior, noticing trends, or probable relationships. 4.8.3 Versatility of intellect. Hypothesis is the product of considerable speculation and imaginative guesswork. It is based partly on known facts and explanations. In formulating a hypothesis, the rich experiences and profound academic background of a researcher are helpful. Significant researches have not taken place accidentally, but are the result of hard work. A researcher must have a rich background knowledge that may enable him/her to perceive relationships among the variables. A researcher must possess a versatile intellect to understand a theory, deduce a hypothesis from theories, be able to spot very quickly the contributing variables in a study, creatively imagine the output or solution to the problem, and have an adventurous and heuristic attitude. all of which depend upon the expenditure of considerable time and effort, along with the persistence of the researcher. It will induce originality in the process of research. Thus, an alert mind is capable of deriving a meaningful hypothesis and rejecting a faulty hypothesis. With his versatile intellect, the researcher may restructure his experiences and deduce the hypothesis from a theory using logic. 4.84 Analogies. Analogies are a strong source for the formulation of a hypothesis and finding out solutions to the problem. Reasoning by analogy is based on similarities and differences between two situations in which a similar or the same phenomenon or event takes place. For example, in a research problem like studying the causes of burnout tendencies among college students, the researcher insightfully thinks, why were burnout tendencies not found among college students 20 to 30 years back as they are today? What has changed them? Quality of teaching or quality of leadership? Arguing analogically in this way may lead the investigator to some conclusions, which may be used for identifying variables and relationships, forming the basis of hypothesis construction. If a researcher knows from previous experience that the old situation is related to other factors Y and Z as well as to X, he may reason out that the new situation may also be related to Y and Z. 4.8.5 Scientific Theory. A systematic review and analysis of theories developed in the field of psychology, sociology, political science, and even in biological sciences may help the researcher to provide a suggestive base to formulate a hypothesis. For example, a researcher working on modification of teacher behavior may benefit from the Skinnerian theory of behavior shaping. 4.8.6 Authentic Knowledge. Since the hypothesis offers a solution to the problem, it must be formulated in consonance with authentic knowledge and irrefutable analysis available. If the hypothesized relationship among the variables involved is substantiated, then the researcher proceeds in a meaningful and scientific manner. The analysis and interpretations provide a sound base to deduce the hypothesis. For example, if a researcher is working on motivation, then Maslow's hierarchy of needs will provide an authentic source for hypothesis formulation. 4.9 Types of Hypothesis. 4.9.1 Directional and non-directional. A research hypothesis must be stated in a testable form for its proper evaluation. This form should indicate a relationship between the variables in clear, concise, and understandable language. Research hypotheses may be directional or non-directional. The hypotheses, which stipulate the direction of the expected differences or relationships, are termed as directional hypotheses. For example, there is a positive relationship between the academic achievement and study habit of students, is a directional hypothesis. This hypothesis stipulates that students with good study habits will have high academic achievement. Similarly, the hypothesis, students with high test anxiety will score badly in examinations as compared to students with low anxiety, is a directional research hypothesis because it stipulates the direction of the difference between the groups. A research hypothesis, which does not specify the direction of expected differences or relationships, is a non-directional research hypothesis. For example, the hypothesis, there is a difference in the academic achievement of BID, students enrolled in open and conventional universities, is a non-directional research hypothesis. Although the hypothesis stipulates that there is a difference in the academic achievement, the direction of the difference is not specified. A hypothesis can take either the declarative form, the null form, or the question form. When the researcher makes a positive statement about the outcome of the study, the hypothesis takes the declarative form. It is more or less a directional hypothesis. For example, the hypothesis, the attitude of parents in the rural areas towards co-education at the primary level is significantly negative in comparison to the attitude of parents of urban areas, is stated in the declarative form. In the null form, the researcher makes a statement that no relationship exists. The hypothesis, there is no difference in the attitude of parents of rural and urban areas towards co-education at the primary level, is an example of a null hypothesis. In the question form hypothesis, a question is asked as to what the outcome will be, instead of stating what outcome is expected. For example, the hypothesis, will teaching students through a mastery learning approach decrease their test anxiety, is a question form hypothesis. 4.9.2 Research hypothesis and null hypothesis. The null hypothesis is used to test statistically the research hypothesis, which has been stated in directional or non-directional form. Null hypothesis is also called testing hypothesis when a directional, declarative, or non-directional hypothesis is tested statistically by converting it into null form. A null hypothesis challenges the assertion of a declarative hypothesis. The research or scientific hypothesis is a formal affirmative statement that predicts the tentative explanation of the relationship between two or more variables. A research hypothesis describes what operations were conducted and tools were used to measure each variable. Thus, the focus of a hypothesis depends on the type of target population, how the data are collected, and what measures are to be used. The whole research process is built on a research hypothesis which illustrates a theory. It is a positive and general kind of statement. For example, there is a difference between the learning styles of boys and girls. This hypothesis is also known as a general hypothesis, empirical hypothesis, experimental hypothesis, theoretical hypothesis, substantive hypothesis, or operational hypothesis. This hypothesis, however, cannot be tested, proved, or disproved. It constitutes the prediction derived from a theory under test. It is also called an alternative hypothesis, as the conclusions are drawn only after accepting or rejecting the null hypothesis. The null hypothesis is a hypothesis indicating no difference or no relationship. It is a neutral type of hypothesis. It denies the existence of any systematic principles apart from the effect of chance. It assumes that no or zero difference exists between two population means or treatments. The null hypothesis is a statistical hypothesis, which is tested within the framework of probability theory. The alternative hypothesis is an operational statement of the research hypothesis. The research hypothesis is the prediction derived from the theory under test. By rejecting or accepting the null hypothesis, one arrives at the conclusions about the research hypothesis. Thus, the relationship between the research hypothesis, H-in, and the null hypothesis, H-0, is if the null hypothesis, H-0, is rejected, then the research hypothesis, H-in, is accepted. But in the beginning stage, the researcher makes an affirmative statement as a prediction of the solution that he proposes to test later. At the stage of statistical analysis of data, the research hypothesis is converted into the null hypothesis. All statistical tests are the tests for the null hypothesis. Rejecting or accepting the null hypothesis asserts that the observed difference or relationship may result from chance errors due to the sampling procedure. After the hypotheses are stated, the researcher moves towards testing them. Hypotheses are subjected to empirical as well as logical testing. The nature of a hypothesis may be simple or complex. A simple hypothesis is tested directly, but a complex hypothesis cannot be tested directly. It may be tested in terms of its deduced consequences. In order to test the hypothesis in terms of deduced consequences, it is necessary to collect evidence by selecting or developing data collecting tools to analyze the data collection, and then to interpret results in the light of the hypothesis and its deduced consequences. The necessary conditions for confirmation are: I. All factual evidence collected through tests or other means, tools, should correspond with the deduced consequences. The data collecting tools should take into account all factors and conditions that are suggested by the consequences. The consequences are logically deduced from the hypothesis. Suppose the researcher wants to test the hypothesis. Effective college principals will have a higher level of job satisfaction. This hypothesis cannot be tested directly by the researcher. He has to proceed indirectly by deducing the consequences that ineffective college principals will have a low level of job satisfaction as compared to that of effective principals. In this way, the researcher does not test the hypothesis, but tests the deduced consequences of the hypothesis. Once all the deduced consequences after testing come out to be true, the hypothesis is confirmed. If some of the consequences are true and some others are not, the hypothesis needs to be examined afresh. Cool, 1997, p. 81. The inference drawn as a result of testing the hypothesis is always tentative. The null hypothesis asserts that there is no difference between the means, but some difference may always occur by chance. When the obtained difference is greater, the null hypothesis cannot be accepted. The question arises as to how much the difference can be due to chance, an estimate of which is provided by the values given in statistical tables. If the obtained difference is greater than the table value, the null hypothesis is rejected. It is accepted if the obtained difference is found to have a sufficiently small probability of occurrence. In either rejection or acceptance of the null hypothesis, two types of errors are always involved. These are type 1 and type 2 errors. They are also called alpha or beta errors, respectively. These two errors are so related that if efforts are made to minimize one error, then the chances of the other error increase. 4.11 Characteristics of a good hypothesis. It is essential that a hypothesis is carefully formulated. A good hypothesis has several basic characteristics. It must be testable. If a hypothesis is not testable, then it becomes difficult for a researcher to either confirm or contradict the relationship among the variables or the deduced consequences. For example, education brings all-round development is difficult to test because it is not easy to operationally isolate the other factors that might contribute towards all-round development. Since a hypothesis predicts the outcome of a study, it must relate variables that are capable of being measured. The hypothesis stated as, there is a positive relationship between the learning style and academic achievement of 8th grade students, can be tested because the variables in the hypothesis are operationally defined and therefore can be measured. It must state the expected relationship between the variables. For example, the hypothesis, there is a significant effect of frustration on the academic achievement of 10th grade students, states the expected relationship between frustration and achievement, which can be measured. However, the hypothesis, students who participate in NSS activities show a higher degree of moral growth than those who do not participate in NSS activities, is not a good hypothesis, as the term moral growth does not refer to a variable that is measurable unless it is operationally defined and a tool created to measure it. It must suggest a tentative solution to the problem under study. For example, academic achievement varies according to the level of intelligence. This hypothesis suggests that intelligence influences academic achievement. It must be clear and stated in a precise manner. A clear statement of hypothesis generally involves concise technical language and definition of terms that are better defined than those in common language. Vague terms or constructs are difficult to define operationally. Use of general terms and words such as good, bad, poor, personality, social class, etc. makes a hypothesis vague. The researcher should use personality as measured by 16 PF, 16 personality factors, intelligence as measured by Raven's progressive matrices, intelligence test, etc. in the statement of a hypothesis. The hypothesis should be limited in scope. The hypothesis of global significance may not yield the usual consequences. Sometimes an overambitious researcher formulates an ambiguous hypothesis of global significance. It takes maturity of viewpoint to realize how little can be accomplished in a specified time. It is desirable to formulate hypotheses that are simple to test and yet are highly significant. A hypothesis must be consistent with known facts. It must be consistent with a substantial body of established facts. A good hypothesis is grounded in well-established theories and laws. A hypothesis must explain what it intends to explain. The variables should be defined operationally so that the predicted relations among them can be tested empirically. A good hypothesis is capable of explaining and testing a significantly large number of consequences. It must be based on some relevant theory or discovered truth. For example, the hypothesis, there is a significant relationship between the contingencies of reinforcement and behavior shaping, derives its source from the theory of Skinner. The relationship between independent and dependent variables in this hypothesis is supported by the behavioristic view of learning by Skinner. The hypothesis should be amenable to testing within a reasonable time. The researcher should not select a problem which involves hypotheses that are not amenable to testing within a reasonable and specified time. The researcher must know the problems which cannot be solved for a long time because of the lack of data. Non-availability of tools and techniques. Let me know if you need. 4.12 Significance and importance of a hypothesis. I. A hypothesis directs, monitors, and controls the research efforts. It provides tentative explanations of facts and phenomena and can be tested and validated. Such explanations, if held valid, lead to generalizations, which help significantly in understanding a problem, and thereby extend the existing knowledge in the area to which they pertain, and thus help in theory building and facilitate extension of knowledge in an area. The hypothesis not only indicates what to look for in an investigation, but how to select a sample, choose a design of research, how to collect data, and how to interpret the results to draw valid conclusions. The hypothesis orients the researcher to be more sensitive to certain relevant aspects of the problem so as to focus on specific issues and pertinent facts. It helps the researcher to delimit his study in scope so that it does not become broad and unwieldy. The hypothesis provides the researcher with rational statements, consisting of elements expressed in a logical order of relationships, which seek to describe or to explain conditions or events that have not yet been confirmed by facts. Some relationships between elements or variables in hypotheses are known facts, and others transcend the known facts to give reasonable explanations for known conditions. The hypothesis helps the researcher relate logically known facts to intelligent guesses about unknown conditions. Airy at 1972, pp. 73 to 74. V. Hypothesis formulation and its testing adds scientific rigor to all types of research. A well-thought-out set of hypotheses places a clear and specific goal before the researcher and equips him with understanding. It provides the basis for reporting the conclusions of the study on the basis of these conclusions. The researcher can make the research report interesting and meaningful to the reader. The importance of a hypothesis is generally recognized more in the studies which aim to make predictions about some outcome. In an experimental study, the researcher is interested in making predictions about the expected outcomes, and therefore, the role of the hypothesis is considered to be of utmost importance. In historical or descriptive studies, on the other hand, the researcher is investigating the history of an event, the life of a man, or is seeking facts to determine the status quo of some situation, and thus may not have a basis for making a prediction of results. In such studies, when fact-finding alone is the aim of the study, a hypothesis may not be required. Most historical or descriptive studies, however, involve not only fact-finding, but interpretation of facts to draw generalizations. For all such major studies, a hypothesis is recommended so as to explain observed facts, conditions, or behavior, and to serve as a guide in the research process. If a hypothesis is not formulated, a researcher may waste time and energy in gathering extensive empirical data and then find that he cannot state facts clearly and detect relevant relationships between variables, as there is no hypothesis to guide her or him. 4.1 Theme. In this unit, the attempt was made to illustrate how the research problem is identified and studied. The selection of a suitable and relevant research problem is a systematic process. While identifying the problem, the existing literature is to be reviewed and the various sources, such as theory, experience, discussion, dissatisfaction, and literature, have to be relevantly used. How the research questions are stated has also been exemplified. A mechanism has been explained as to how to formulate the research questions and what considerations should be kept in view to make the research questions worth studying. A hypothesis is a tentative solution of an intelligent guess about a research problem under study. It is not simply an educated guess. Rather, it is based on past research where the researcher gathers the evidence to advance a hypothesized relationship between variables. Thus, it is a conjecture statement about the solution of a problem, which the researcher goes on to verify on the basis of relevant information. Various sources, namely experience, creativity, background knowledge, scientific theories, etc., are important sources which are helpful in the formulation of a hypothesis. Based on these sources, hypotheses are of various types: I, directional and non-directional, and I, research and null hypothesis. After the hypothesis, here is the corrected text with After the hypothesis is formulated, it is subjected to testing. Some hypotheses are simple and can be tested directly. In most situations, however, they are complex and cannot be so tested. They are tested in terms of their deduced consequences. A good hypothesis is one which is testable and states the expected relationship between variables. It is clearly and precisely stated. A good hypothesis should state the expected relationship between the variables. It is limited in scope and should be consistent with the most known facts. A hypothesis has great significance in the research process. It directs, monitors, and controls the research effort. Key helps in drawing generalizations to build theories. And T suggests the method of problem solving. A V helps in studying cause-effect relationships between the variables. V facilitates extension of knowledge in an area, and V provides a basis for reporting the conclusions of the study. 4.4 Glossary: Declarative knowledge, empirical tradition, rationalistic tradition, pragmatic tradition. Knowing about things. All natural phenomena can be known only through experience and not through deductive reasoning or intuition. Knowledge is derived through deductive reasoning based on self-evident basic truths. The experimental character of the process of acquiring knowledge.